Here's a full roll collar instruction page. In my book, this is chapter 10. This one's going to fit into the same neckline as the last one. And when I lay these pieces out, it looks like I have plenty of room for a collar in this space, so I'm going to go ahead and trace the back neck again. Down a little bit so that I have reference. Then this one, full scale, would overlap 4 inches instead of the 1/2 inch that we usually start with. So there's our 1/2 inch, and 4 inches in our case would be 2, and that is just so much. So I'm going to measure out just straight this way. I could measure over that way. You know, it's going to be somewhere right there, but I measured 2 inches. Full scale, that would be 4. Have I said that like enough times? Okay. So then I'm going to rotate this one around. I have to get the other stuff out of the way. Want me to zoom in on that? Of course you do. Of course I will zoom out instead. So I'm holding it in place right there, rotating that around until it touches the line. Making sure that it's still lined up right there. And now I'm going to trace just a little bit of that edge and the rest of the way around the front neck. And then down the front. So that's the basis for my collar. And we have overlapped this much. If we want the collar sitting on the neck to stand up the neck and then fall down and wrap around like that. So it's actually climbing the neck on the inside where we can't see it and then falling back down. This is a full roll collar, so it stands and then falls. So this edge has become smaller because it doesn't lay flat. This outside edge is going to become smaller. But right through here, we need to blend. So I'll want to use my curve, but we'll be blending through there, and then we'll move the notch out. And I want to make sure that I've got a center back notch, another notch that matches the shoulder, and that it takes up the same amount of space. And this one is 1 5/8 plus a 16th. I don't like to count 16ths. And this one is 1 5/8 plus a 16th. So that little change in curve is still in the same position. So I don't need to make anything longer. When I made jackets for a factory, one of the things that we didn't do it on a blouse so much, but on jackets, if we had a heavier fabric, we would sometimes extend the collar out a 1/16 of an inch, so it had to ease into the neck slightly, and it hung nicer. But that's just one of those little patterning things that you do depending on the heaviness of the fabric. Okay, so we've overlapped it, and then we're going to drop it down 1/4 of an inch this time, which is less, and we're still going to push it up that 1/8 of an inch. So because this is half scale, I'm going to line it up right here and bump it up a 1/16 of an inch and line it up here and drop it down. Instead of a fourth, I'm going to drop it down an eighth. So the amount that you need to fix that curve changes slightly with the type of collar. And maybe you've figured out by now that this sort of thing is you give it your best guess, and sometimes you still have to change it once you've made a real test sample. You always make a physical test sample out of the correct fabric for everything you're going to do. Even if it's, especially if it's going to be sewn in a factory. If you've got 5/8 of an inch seams and you're sewing only one, maybe you can cheat a little bit. But when you're sewing something in a factory and you're cutting out tens of thousands of them, you want to cut it out of the correct fabric because each fabric behaves a little bit differently, and the amount that you raise and lower this changes a little bit when you see the physical sample. So it's important to always be making test samples. Okay, so this one now we've got our fit edge, and because this one is going to come all the way up the back and then fall back down, if I want this to come around the back neck and be an inch high, then I also, if it's coming up an inch, then I need it to fall down an inch plus a quarter because I want it to hide. So if I want this to finish an inch and a quarter in the back, I'm going to make it 2 1/4 inches long. That's a design choice, but that's how I usually decide. And this one, just for fun, I'm going to make this collar pointy, and it will come up and fall down. I've kind of drawn it so it looks like fangs, but all right. Not my best work, and recorded right there for everybody to see forever. All right, this isn't illustration class. I will just calm down. Okay, so we'll get rid of this. This has been raised. This has been lowered. And I want to blend this length with however I want it to look for the front. And I'm going to do that with it so it's pointy. And then I'll cut one out and try it, and if I don't like it, I'll make adjustments. You can curve that edge or not, and if this is where the center front is, I am kind of calculating what's going to happen with that collar, and I'm going to measure out 2 1/4 as I go around. But you can do what you want to. I don't know that I want it to be, well, I guess I do. It's actually getting a little bit longer right there. But I want it, that's my guess. And remember, that's what this is. It's your best guess. And as close as you can get to correct, the less redos you'll need to do. But the reality is, when you get started, it'll take you 2 or 3 tries to get the collar you want. Because the book gives you instructions for one collar, and there are many options. Endless, countless options. So I'm cleaning that up this time. And I want to flip that over, but there's not room on the desk over there. There we go. Made it a little longer, but I'm happier with it. I've also pulled it a little closer than to the neck than I drew it, because when this folds over up here and comes down, it's going to pull a little bit away from the center front. In fact, I might wish that I had extended this all the way down, because if this folds through here as it's going around the neck, because this is that imaginary fold line, roll line rather. This is the stand and this is the fall. So that's going to pull this section up over here, and it will end up hanging more back here. So if I only wanted to do one sample and I wasn't sure, I'd go ahead and make the collar come to here, sew it together, mark on the fabric piece how I wanted it, and then I'd trim the pattern based on that, so I didn't have to sew a whole new sample. It's easier to err on the side of making it too big and then making corrections on the sample so you don't have to start over. So we would be adding seam allowance all the way around, not down the center back because that's the fold again. And then we would be making our under collar smaller, or we could call this, I would call this my under collar, and make my top collar bigger. And in this case I don't have to blend to clear up to here, I can just blend from here back into this space. This is the center front. Do an erase first, then the ink holds the pencil, and then you can't erase it. was more accurate that time because I was using my stomach muscles, and it doesn't matter if I go over the edge I'm going to cut off. I do like to bump the tripod. Did I cut that down? Yes, I did, but I erased it, so it made me nervous. At work, I don't usually do things in ink, so I don't have to erase. Then I can have all of my thought process on there. And yes, I'm cutting backwards. And there's my shoulder notch. Oh, look at that, I missed. That's what happens when I'm looking at the screen. And this one I'll just put in the middle. I am very fond of notchers. Okay, when I make a mistake like this, I have to fix it. It never looks as nice. So, sometimes I will actually take one of those little notches and fill it in and put it right where it's going to line up with the tape. This is something I would be more inclined to do. So I've got the notch on the tape. Then I'll fill in the little hole over here and attach the tape to the paper. And I used the notch because it was purple and I didn't want it to be noticeable. So I filled in behind it, and I'm going to make sure that that's trimmed exactly where it belongs. On paper, I could maybe just adjust it with a piece of tape, but if you're working in the tag board, you have to fill it in like that. Okay, so you can't really see that one because I used the right color. So this is my full roll. Just put full. And I'm going to call it my undercollar. Cut one on fold, size 8. And I'm leaving my little roll line there so that you remember it. And this part is the stand, and this part is the fall from the roll line. So I will use this to make my top collar. So I will trace it exactly the way it is for my top collar because my notches are already marked. It's convenient, and I felt that little disturbance right there when I traced it because I ran into the tape and it's not quite smooth, so I might need to fix that. So if that's the undercollar, then I want my top collar to be slightly larger. So I'm going to put a mark down, a 1/16 of an inch, full scale. I would do an 1/8. And then I'll just extend my center back line so it's where it belongs. And then I will bring this down at the center back and line it up there and blend the front. So this is just touching, it's not quite all the way to the end, but it will help me blend it to 0. And because I'm not marking that notch because there is some space there at the end, so I'm going to divide that space equally between both ends, and then I'll put the notch so that I get my ease halfway between the two. So this is the old one. I want to erase that much, and it's really not a lot. Oh, there, that time I thought I was doing it right. So it's really just a tiny bit, and I blended it from the total amount to 0. On the curved one I had to go all the way to the neckline, but it was very, very slight on the curved area. So that's my top collar. But that's a personal thing. I just found that when I started doing this in a work setting, that the undercollar naturally made the top collar smaller, and I would usually have been given a measurement for the finished edge of the collar. And if you wanted to be really precise, you would add the two totals together. And I just found that visually it worked out better if I made my top collar larger than my undercollar after I made my undercollar the right number. Then it would turn out to be what I was expecting. Okay, so this time I'm not going to color the underside. I'm going to mark where my fold is. This is the center back. This is my full roll top collar. Cut 1 on fold, size 8. And for this one, I'm just going to measure where the seam allowance goes in a couple of places, always on the corners. I don't know why, but that's tradition. On the corner, you just, oh, I should have done the other end at the same time. When you're working on the corner, you just mark both seams, and then it's easy for whoever's cutting and sewing it to see if there are any changes in the seam allowance. And this is more what you would expect it to look like finished, without any colors and without the complete outline. But I have labeled each. And if it's a really long seam, I might put the number on it twice. And then I just cut that out and use it.